Of the post-Cold War era, Western strategy operated on a deceptively simple assumption, I would say, that globalization had made supply chains efficient, that sovereignty was pretty much an abstraction, and that interdependence was stabilizing. But I think that the war in Ukraine totally shattered this assumption. What the war revealed, I think brutally and unmistakably, was that sovereignty is not actually an abstract legal concept. And you know, the world was built on the spirit of industry. You know, sovereignty is industrial, is logistical. Sovereignty is all about whether a nation can manufacture, supply, maintain, repair under pressure. But I think that most importantly, sovereignty is perhaps time. And you know that history has returned, but so has IVOR ICHIKOWITZ. So welcome back. It's been a while.
Thank you, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And congratulations, what an amazing event. I think you've created something very important in the global defense calendar, so congratulations.
That's thanks to you guys. So Ivo, I mean, we've been discussing it a lot in private, but I think that we know Western governments have talked about the global arms control in the language of ethics and human rights. Do you think that this is actually what we stand for, or it's maybe a way to protect the dominance on some large defense players from big countries?
You know, this has been the biggest hypocrisy of all time. And I'm afraid that we have to go back to basics. Defense industrial capability is not just about industrial and political sovereignty. It's about a simple ability to be able to protect the democracies that we've fought so hard for around the world. Now, I can just give you an example from my African experience. You know, Africa represents 54 countries. 54 countries, of which 45 fought very hard for their democracy. And they have not a single one has been allowed to create or maintain a defense industrial capability. Now, how in heaven's name can you fight to defend a democracy if you have no capacity to do so, and you are completely at the mercy of the Russians or the Chinese or the Americans to be your friends so that they can provide you the equipment you need to protect yourselves? You know, there are more than 30 major Islamist, fundamentalist insurgencies in Africa right now. Every single country that is involved in defeating those insurgencies is in some way battling to secure the equipment that they require. So this is complete hypocrisy. The West, who are, let's call it as it is, the Americans today are the biggest suppliers of defense equipment into the world, and certainly they produce remarkable equipment with remarkable capability. As recently as last week, the Germans were questioning whether there was a kill switch on their F-35. This is scary stuff, because now even the people that can get the equipment are not even sure that they can use their equipment. So I think that the dialogue has changed completely. First of all, it is complete hypocrisy. Second of all, the fact that Europe, that China, that Russia, that the United States can become the world's arsenal is complete illusion, absolute illusion. And middle powers, smaller countries, now need to pay some serious attention to how they're going to look after themselves, because you can be sure of one thing: the big powers are not going to be there when you need them.
You know, do you think, we've seen that many times. We've seen that in Afghanistan, in South Vietnam. We've seen that with the Kurds, and very recently. Nations are treated as allies and then abandoned because of changing strategic priorities. And that makes me, ask whether being a close ally to a major power is always an advantage, or sometimes it can become a trap.
We're sitting in a world of flip-flop diplomacy. Absolute flip-flop diplomacy. There is I wake up every morning and I look at the news feed, not because I'm particularly interested in anything other than what opportunity has President Trump created for me today. The reality is that allies of yesterday are not allies of today, and may well be allies again tomorrow. But how can you create a defense capability in a country, doesn't matter how big or small, when you're reliant on an ally today that may not be your ally tomorrow. And I think that we went into this whole process of globalization. We went into this whole process of trying to create economies of scale. It didn't work. Globalization has failed dismally. Let's call it what it is, and let's accept that these alliances are traps. You have big powers trying to control small powers through the fact that they hold the levers that control the capability of a country to defend itself. And small and middle powers can't afford to be in that position anymore. It's just not real. It's not practical.
You own the largest defense industry in Africa, and that makes me think, there are not many people like you, many industries like you, but why? Is that because of lack of local leadership, or because of the pressure of outsiders, maybe?
The truth is that defense industrial sovereignty needs to be driven by governments. There is only one reason that Paramount exists. We're at an era of history. We're an absolute mistake of history. In 1994, when Nelson Mandela became president in South Africa, he inherited one of the most advanced defense industries in the world. That defense industry had been created through billions of dollars of investment by the Europeans and by the Americans to help South Africa fight the only ever armed conflict during the Cold War. And that was a war, believe it or not, between the Russians and the Americans in Angola. The proxy for the Russians were the Cubans, and the proxy for the Americans were the South African apartheid government. And because of the sanctions that have been placed on South Africa by the United Nations as an apartheid state, and just look at history repeating itself, the Americans could not arm South Africa. So what was the only thing they could do? Help South Africa create a sophisticated defense industry. They did exactly the same thing for the Israelis at exactly the same time. What was the first thing that every major power came through the door to tell Mandela after they'd kind of half-heartedly congratulated him for what was one of the world's most important liberation struggles? They said, you've got to break down your defense industry. You don't need it. We'll look after you. The Chinese came in with a massive package and says, you shut down your defense industry, we'll give you all the capability you need. The Russians did exactly the same thing. The Brits, the French, the Americans, the Germans. Mandela was clever enough to realize that it had taken 80 years to develop that capability, and it was an asset of the African continent. And he knew that if it stayed in government hands, it would die. And I just happened to have been at the wrong place at the right time. And I saw what he saw. And we basically picked up the pieces of a broken industry and turned it into a private sector industry that landed up doing what government was supposed to do. There are very few players like us in the world, and we shouldn't exist. I am the first person to admit that we should not exist. You cannot leave the establishment of its sovereign defense capability, strategic capability, only in the hands of the private sector. Yes, the private sector is critical and important, but if government doesn't back the development of the defense industry, you have no chance. 5 years ago, I came to Greece to talk about the establishment of domestic platform capability in Greece. And you know what? The Greek government 5 years ago said, not interesting, we don't need it. We'll get from the Americans, we'll get from the Germans. Look what has changed in 5 years. If the Greek government had gone the route we would have liked them to have gone, and they didn't have to go with us, today Greece would be a major platform supplier, a major supplier in the European defense industrial base.
But there was this argument that limiting defense production boosts stability, boosts predictability, creates a more peaceful world. Is that the case?
Absolutely. I'm afraid that the reality is that in the world we're in today, if you don't prepare for war, you will never be able to create the deterrents that are required in order to prevent war. You will also never be able to deploy the human resources because you will never be able to train them. And in South Africa, the defense industrial capability was run down to very little. One of the most competent armies in the world. Been run down today. I wake up every morning and I'm worried that Lesotho might invade South Africa, because it can happen. We have 2 operational fighter aircraft and 1 helicopter. And the destruction of the South African defense capability started with the destruction of the industrial capability and then moved on to the destruction of the military capability. And it will take another 50 years to rebuild what was lost literally in 5 years. And that's happened in so many countries in the world. So I am a strong believer in the fact that every single country has, even just from a national pride perspective, has to have the ability to defend themselves when their allies turn against them, replenish their stocks when their allies turn against them, and be in a situation where they don't have to play catch-up for 5 years when the emergency arises. Because when the emergency arises, it happens today. And if you can't solve the problem today, well, then don't bother to solve the problem at all.
You're in the business of building some big toys. You're building some mass. And what's the role of mass, now that the battlefield is becoming increasingly computational?
So I have a very different view of the computational battlefield. As defense technology evolved through the years, I always use the example, you had a guy in a kind of Model T Ford with some armor plate around it using binoculars. And that was properly sophisticated. He used to run to a field telephone that had been set up with wires to the next station, and that was how communication worked. And that was sophisticated. And as things developed, the basics never changed. The requirement for infantry, the requirement for armored vehicles, the requirement for intelligence and communication has never changed. But incremental technologies have been developed. Suddenly the binoculars became a periscope, and the periscope became an electro-optical sight, and the electro-optical sight became a stabilized sight, and technology evolved. And I think that AI and computational capability is just an evolution to support the basics. And what are the basics? The basics are, you need airplanes, you need vehicles, you need ships, you need real estate to put all this stuff onto. So much effort is going into the drone space, and it's important, it's very important. But part of the reason that you're hearing about drones so much is because the barriers to entry to get into building drones is very, very small. But the barriers to entry in platform technology are huge. It takes us from concept to in-service application 11 years to develop an armored vehicle. And 8 of those years goes into trialing, testing, proving, certifying. The biggest issue in building big platforms is not money, it's time. It's time. And if you don't invest that time early, then you don't have that capability. Now, you can have as much computational capability as you want. If you can't put that computational capability in the hands of soldiers who actually have to be on the battlefield, and let's not kid ourselves. This whole idea of a soldier-less battlefield, complete illusion. Complete illusion. It's never going to happen. And it's not going to happen in any of our lifetimes. You are always going to have men in the machine, in the interface, whether you like it or not. So, I think that it's important. I think that the evolution of AI as an enhancer of decision-making is important. But the day we take the man out of the interface, this is not a world I want to be living in.
But isn't it inevitable? What do you think?
No, I don't think it's inevitable.
Human in the loop? Yeah.
I don't think it's inevitable. I think that, I'm a great believer in the, in common sense in humanity. And I think that as evolved and as smart as AI becomes, what AI can't do is it can't have complete situational awareness. Now, we manufacture one of the most advanced light combat aircraft in the world. And it has a pusher propeller, and it has a canopy that allows you to see 180 degrees. Now, the greatest asset of that aircraft is not the bombs it carries, it's not the weapon systems, it's not even the electronic warfare systems or the intelligence gathering capability. It's the fact that the pilot has complete situational awareness. Now, when you're operating a drone and you're a computer flying a drone, you're looking at the world through a funnel. And if you're looking in that direction and what you need to see is over there, you're going to miss it. Only human beings can have complete situational awareness. And if you want to fight a war competently, there's got to be a human being that can make that split-second decision, not just based on what he's seeing straight in front of him, but what's going on in the entire battlefield. And I don't think that'll ever change. I really don't.
Can I be a bit provocative? I mean, you've asked many times for an increase in defense industrialists. You say you believe that this is a good thing, but you're a defense industrialist. So I guess this is to your benefit, it's for your profit. Is that the case?
You know what? Guilty as charged. I have spent my life building a defense industrial capability in Africa. That defense industrial capability is now expanding into the rest of the world. Why? Because we were able to learn about asymmetrical warfare before anybody in the world knew that asymmetrical warfare existed. I have broken my neck to invest every single cent that we've made in 30 years back into technology which we own. You know, I've never taken a dividend out of the business, never once. But we employ 5,000 people around the world. We own 3,000 separate packages of intellectual property. And we today have the ability to go and help governments around the world create sovereign defense industrial capability.
Can you give us an example?
I get huge kicks out of that. So if that's what my enthusiasm about creating defense industrial capability is leading me to, I'm guilty as charged.
Can you give us an example? I mean, what's, let's say, your favorite, your most successful project?
Oh, we have several very successful projects, but I'm going to give you a great example.
Yeah.
Government of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan lives in a fascinating place. They've got China on the left, they've got Russia on the right, they've got Europe in front of them, and everybody came to Kazakhstan and said, listen, don't worry, we're your friends, we'll look after you. And the president was clever enough to realize that that was not sustainable. He wanted to create a defense industrial capability. He went to everybody. He went to everybody. He went to the Americans, he went to the Germans, he went to the Chinese. He didn't go to the Russians and the Chinese, in fact, because he knew that that would create all kinds of instability. And everybody turned him down. Everybody said, don't worry, buy from us, use your oil money, we'll look after you. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And eventually, he got to us. We were, and I say this as it was, we were the last chance. We were the last stone he turned. And I looked at this and I said, wow, what an amazing geography. Let's do it. And everybody said, you're crazy. There's never been a defense industry. There are no engineers. The place is minus 50 in winter and plus 50 in summer. You don't want the headache. So that's exactly the headache I want. Because if we can create a defense industry in Kazakhstan, we can do it anywhere in the world. Within a year, we were fully operational. The president said to me, he said, I'm giving you this contract, but you're going to meet me here in 12 months. And you're going to hand me the keys. And I want to tell you, it was a scary moment because he's a big guy and he had a lot of very armed people around him. And I said, we'll do it. And we did do it. 11 years later, that factory is today the pride of Kazakhstan. There's not a foreign head of state who goes there without seeing our factory. There's not a single thing we can't do in that Kazakh factory that we can do anywhere else in the world. And we have 100% Kazakhs there. There's not a single expatriate in that factory. So it shows you it can be done. And you know what? Today, Kazakhstan doesn't need anybody for anything. They can actually go to war with capability they've got in their country directly under their control.
So one last question. It's going to be a cliché question, but I know you're manufacturing in Ukraine, and you got from 0 to 1 in 8 months. I mean, what are the lessons from Ukraine for the rest of the world, and especially for the global south?
You know, the Ukrainians are an inspiration to everybody in the world, and they're an inspiration because they are committed to their cause. You know, for them, defense industrial capability is not about money. It's not about even longevity. It's about living today. And what we've seen in Ukraine is that everything is possible. The biggest issue is that this has 100% government support. So government creates an environment where every hurdle is pushed out of the way in order to achieve what you need to achieve today. And if the rest of Europe can learn just one thing from Ukraine, its government's role is to create an enabling environment. Private sector in Ukraine isn't a factor, it's not a thing. It's private people who are being innovative to fight a war for their country. And yes, it'll become private sector business into the future. You know, there are companies in Ukraine that they're only allowed to make 3%. This is not about business, but that's what happens when you're fighting a war. And I think, and I'm not suggesting that Europe has to go to war before they learn these lessons, but if there is going to be a rearming of Europe, which there has to be, get government to create an enabling environment, support the development of a defense industry, and get the hell out of the way. And then the innovation will happen unbelievably. You know, everybody talks about the enabling environment that Europe is creating. To this day, I cannot get a bank account for a defense company in Europe. Fantastic. So you can get permits, and you can't get a bank account.
So let's hope that next year, when we meet again, Europe will be divorced from the mentalities of the present.
Well, my mission now is to set up portable production in multiple countries in Europe, and I'm seeing it as a challenge, not even as a business opportunity. And it's an exciting challenge. We'll make it happen.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.